Hello and welcome to Earthcast, a platform for discussions about bridging the resource gap between people and planet. I am Olivia Taylor, or Olivia Earth on the socials, your host, and I will be interviewing a series of change makers, thinkers and disruptors, and asking them about their areas of expertise. Together, we will discover fresh perspectives and the most useful levers in society for change. The main question that we will explore is how are trade-offs made between people, planet and profit? More specifically, how do we solve wicked problems and make decisions at the margin? If you would like to hear more from Earthcast, subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media. Today, for episode 12, I'm interviewing Andile Ngcobo, who is a 27-year-old farmer from Pietermaritzburg, managing Tusokuhle Farming Pty Limited. He is an experienced farm manager with a demonstrated history of working in the farming industry. Andile is skilled in strategic management, sustainable development, business and agricultural production planning, public speaking and leadership. He has also been on the front cover of Farmers Weekly in January 2019 and holds a Diploma in Agriculture from Cedara College of Agriculture in KwaZulu-Natal. Andile, please will you tell me about some of the work that you are doing with Sanlam?
Thank you so much for having me, Olivia. I'm currently working on an influencer partnership with Sanlam. Basically, they have rebranded their entire brand, and they are starting to use social media as a way of getting through to people, because that's currently how, or the direction in which the world is moving towards, where people are now getting lots of the information on social media from the palm of their hand and their cell phone, and no longer get all of the information from television or flyers or pamphlets. So as part of my category as a young and savvy investor, as well as a young business person, as well as single and ready to mingle, as they call it, my duty is just to create awareness around financial consciousness, saving and the benefits of being conscious about our spending habits, our buying habits, which is quite interesting because it ties in quite a lot to my job in general. Being in business, I understand the concept of buying power, and I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of what affects the way in which our produce gets sold or is marketed. So that's what I'm currently working with Sanlam.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for explaining. I'm really, I guess, glad to see that young innovators, particularly in the agri space, are being, rewarded for the work that they're doing. So I guess, for lack of a better term, I'm stoked for you. But yeah, so thank you so much. And then Andile, at a high level, what are some of the supply and demand trends that we are seeing in South Africa in the fresh produce sector?
When we started out, especially with lockdown, we saw quite a lot of people who were sort of bulk buying, trying to store because of the fear that, a lot of things were going to run out, especially since they suspected that the world was going to come to a standstill. So we saw a lot of people buying it, but obviously with fresh produce, it's a bit different because, people want to eat it fresh. So, not a lot of people can actually store fresh produce as much, but nonetheless, our sales remained consistent for a very long time, because when people were in lockdown, people were at home, people were obviously very conscious about spending a lot of their time, if not relaxing and, working from home. They were obviously consuming a whole lot more than they would previously. And they started realizing as well as the health benefits of having of obviously eating healthier food. And so we saw quite a consistent supply from our side of the farms in terms of the stability of prices. People were not so big on negotiating and, sort of buying or compare buying across different retailers and different stores. So from between us and our agents, the retailer, we saw that there was a consistent supply and a consistent economic rate going for all fresh produce. But the problem started when, the more and more COVID started to affect people's jobs. So buying power changed. And so less people were splurging. Yes, we still remain consistent, because, at the end of the day, what we realized, especially being in KZN in South Africa, part of our staple food, yes, would obviously be our mealie meal, but coupled with with fresh produce, cabbage being one of the most consumed vegetables because of the affordability, and obviously the quantity in which you get per serving of the one unit, So we then realized that obviously it's now that the prices were actually increasing, for the value of our products was increasing. And so far we're literally in a space where the fresh produce aspect of agriculture has been performing better and more consistently than it had been for quite some time, within our province.
Thank you so much for that update. It's also great to hear it from someone who's on the ground doing the work. And then further, what are some of the greatest challenges facing sustainable production? What are the barriers to affordable quality and quantity of produce? A little bit later, I'm going to ask you more specifically about bees and trade-offs, but at a high level, what are these greatest challenges?
So, the world has transitioned quite a lot, because I'll make a couple of examples, if you don't mind. I'll start off with just talking about how being a young person who has exposed the agricultural industry so much, I've had an influx of people who have been inspired by what I do and who have now been exposed to the industry, not as a duty or as a chore, but more as a career, in the primary sector, which wasn't so glamorous before, but now people are starting to realize the value behind how food actually gets to the table. So with that inspiration in mind, I get a lot of influx of people who are inspired by what I do, want to know how I got into it, want to know how they can get into it, if I studied or if I just, started getting practical experience from my past. But what I get a lot of as well is, the older generation will always state that it's amazing how a lot of them went through school because their parents were subsistence farmers, especially in the rural areas, and they would farm organically because they were not exposed to things like chemicals or pesticides or herbicides or fertilizers. Everything was organic. It was organic manure, urea from chicken litter. They would get their seeds or seedlings, plant them in the ground. They'd water using, buckets or whatever the case might be, directly from the river. There was no contamination. There were no issues. Everything was done quite naturally. But as it became more and more of a competitive business and everything started to become commercialized, so it became quite unsustainable for one to depend on organic production through getting things like chicken litter and collecting grass, for example, to mulch in between the rows so that they suppress weed growth in between the plots where you've planted your vegetables, so that they won't have contamination from pests. But the issue is that we are now chasing. Let's just look at it this way. So sustainability obviously has three main pillars, I guess, and those would be the earth or planet, and then it'll obviously be the profit aspect. I think it's people, which is all sustainability, or basically. So we moved away from focusing on the environment, and we started looking more at profits, and we all became profit driven. And in becoming profit driven, so that called for us to start increasing our numbers. So we moved away from subsistence and we went towards commercial. And in doing so, it became quite a challenge to sustain production profitably without there being ways to, in inverted commas, cheat the system. So things like pesticides were introduced because they can be used in mass production, and you spend less on spraying or covering a whole lot more cabbages than if you were just working on 5,000 organic cabbages. Now you can spray over 90,000 cabbages within a space of an hour and a half or 2 hours using pesticides, and then you know that your crop is going to remain because it won't be damaged from insects or pests. And that's the issue. So the economies of scale have sort of created a more profit-driven view and less of an organic and fresh perspective towards fresh produce production. And that obviously then compromises the environment extremely, because now there are issues with looking after our soils. There is issues of water contamination because somehow herbicides, pesticides land up in our groundwater, they land up in our water sources. We then also have issues of fertilizers being overused and abused, and that also can destroy our soils. And obviously that also goes as far as destroying wetlands, and that with chasing profits and increasing scale, so we start to creep into spaces that the sacred spaces that we should be protecting, like our wetlands. So with that being the case, we now have to work backwards from a commercial and profit standpoint, work our way backwards towards sustaining our environment, which is now also becoming quite expensive, because there are certain times where we have to plan our production in such a way that we consider replenishing our soils, replenishing our water sources, and that break in production does affect us economically. But we've got to now actually accept that if we're going to have farmland or land in general that is going to be sustainable and workable in the future for future generations, now is the time to start thinking about looking after the environment. So we have embarked on a journey as farmers, those in clusters within our regions. I know of a couple of projects, and the one such that I have been involved in recently is the Umgeni Conservancy project. The Umgeni Conservancy project, which is basically a group of farmers in the Umgeni district or region who are taking it upon themselves to start looking at our natural resources like our wetlands and looking at our production in a sustainable way, so that we do not abuse our soils, we do not abuse the amount of water that we are using, and to also just make sure that we also look out and look after the natural flora and fauna that occur in our region, so that we are able to have these very beautiful and natural animals remain in our area, because they are there for a purpose. We believe that the wildlife that we have is in its natural space. We came through to establish businesses and farming in farm areas where it was actually just natural veldt and natural forest. So these animals still deserve to have a place within the ecosystem in general. So the issue is that there's quite a high expense attached to sustainable thinking and sustainable behavior and sustainable production. And unfortunately, because people are driven towards only putting money into something that will generate a profit, we find that it's still quite, the idea of becoming more sustainable is still a bit stagnant and slow, and the effects are constantly affecting our natural resources.
I hear exactly what you're saying, that it's really difficult to sell the sustainability story, because at present it appears to be so expensive, because for so long we didn't consider the other two, the people and planet part of the 3 Ps for sustainability, as you were explaining, when we just looked at profits. But it's really interesting to see now. But I guess further then, yesterday was World Bee Day. Let's chat bees. How are you seeing bees affected by traditional farming techniques?
So the issue with bees, funny enough, we were in a space on the farm of trying to introduce bees as part of our production, because bees naturally are required to fertilize some of our produce. For example, you get your hybrid and open pollinated varieties. So the funny story is, for example, with butternut production or squash production, you get your hybrid plants and you get your open pollinated plants. Now on the market, you find that the open pollinated plants are actually better quality and they taste better. And the open pollinated are obviously pollinated naturally by bees, as opposed to the more scientific, hardy hybrid seeds that we plant. Because as much as you get very good production and consistent production from these plants, but somehow the taste is not as sweet and as natural as your open pollinated plants. So with understanding this, we thought, well, let's see if we can increase our open pollinated plant varieties by introducing bees on purpose, so that if we collect, or if we catch bees and we have hives closer to our fields where we're producing, then obviously that'll increase our chances of getting a slightly higher yield from our open pollinated fields. And that's when I started to actually just become conscious about how bees have been affected drastically by how we have now become commercial farmers, simply because, again, of uses of pesticides that are sprayed directly on plants and are systemic. So some herbicides or some pesticides are systemic. When you spray them on the leaves of the plant, they are actually absorbed into the plants and into the stems right down to the roots, and then they protect the plant from pests because they become unpalatable or unfavorable for the pests to eat. Now, when we cover these plants to protect them from pests, we don't realize how we affect the senses, the natural senses of the bees. And that has created a situation where we are losing the number of bees because they are no longer able to produce as much or collect as much nectar to produce as much honey as they need to sustain their hives. And we've seen a massive decline in the number of bees in general. And this experiment for us was so obvious when we were advised that if we put up bee hives to catch bees, it should take about 2 weeks before we start seeing bee activity around these hives so that we are able to then obviously collect bees. But it has now taken up to about 3 months, and we still haven't had any bees inhabit these bee boxes, which this generally goes to show. And we also tried to set them up closer to where there would be natural bee activity, because we have quite a lot of natural aloe on our lands. And the orange flowers, those bell-shaped orange flowers that hang from the aloe tree, apparently have very good nectar for these bees to collect. And so we found that, even in a high bee activity area, it was quite difficult to collect bees. And that proves and has shown that, we have seen massive decline in the number of bees that occur naturally in our environment, which obviously has affected just maybe the growth of not only our commercial plants that we've planted for production and food consumption, but we've also seen how that affects our natural fauna.
Thanks for bringing our attention to the importance that bees play, particularly in light of World Bee Day yesterday. I guess I should have probably asked you a less ambiguous question, and I asked you about traditional farming techniques. I should have asked you about commercial farming techniques. That's actually the word I should have used. But what I wanted to say is, further, we've spoken about bees. Let's talk about the social aspect now. Are there any trade-offs that you need to make associated with keeping up with demands, particularly with regarding social issues, i.e. introducing new technologies that could replace jobs? How are you currently thinking about these issues?
So we can look at it from the dynamic of how the operation that we currently run is built up. I realize that across many of the farming or agricultural businesses around our region, you find that, first of all, we hire majority women. And in hiring majority women, it's often the youth, quite young people, and also very old women. And then you'll have a few men, but the men often occupy jobs such as being, drivers, technicians, mechanics on the farm, a few herdsmen here and there. But a lot of the work on the farm will also get carried out by women. So, the sorting, the grading, the picking, the planting, those are mostly done, or the pruning as well, will be done by women. And so that dynamic with having so many youth working on unskilled job just basically means that there must be a lack of exposure to a lot of the youth regarding various skills that they could get in order for them to be able to become a little bit more competitive when it comes to the job market. For example, everybody who has been through, primary, high school, and then eventually college will primary and high school, will then obviously be sold the dream that they need to attend a university in order for them to become eligible for a good job. But there are so many, in the primary sector specifically, there are so many other possible avenues that one could look at. For example, just getting skilled in terms of understanding administration and finance, being able to use the basic skill of being able to use a computer, things like welding, and boiler making. All of these are very, 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 very important skills that need a little bit of training and a little bit of theory for one to be able to become hands-on and a little bit more aware of the skill that is required on the farm. So the issue now is that because of the cost of production, we have to kind of look at ways to reduce the cost. And our highest cost at the moment will always be labor because of the amount of people we need to carry out our duties. Therefore, when we start to look at innovative ways to work the lands and produce without using too much labor, so people's hourly jobs fall away because we need then pay less people, and then you find that it becomes a bit of a difficult space to navigate through, because the idea of creating jobs probably is one of the biggest and most rewarding from a corporate social responsibility perspective. But unfortunately, the cost of that is too high versus the cost of becoming more innovative and moving towards technology and machinery. So now we're in a space where we have to look at how agri-seaters can transition from teaching primary agricultural methods of production and start teaching a little bit more skills on the use of technology. So being able to use a tablet, being able to use a computer, being able to operate machinery that will cut down or reduce the cost of production. So becoming more efficient. And personally, on our operation, we have started off with just getting all or as many of our employees, especially women, accustomed with a simple skill of being able to drive. Being able to get a driver's license and just being able to operate a tractor, being able to operate a truck, being able to operate a vehicle, because that alone will speak to efficiency, and they become more and more hands-on and available to be able to do things that can actually speed up the process of production. And in gaining that skill, they then also not bound to this industry alone, but they can take that and utilize it anywhere where jobs are available. That also goes without saying that we also then try to get more training done where people start understanding the importance of being able to grade produce, for example. Just a simple skill of being able to grade your produce, so that whenever there's a harvest and we need to price A grade and separate that from B grade or C grade, now they have the skill to be able to carry that out from within a pack house. So there are various elements that we look at in terms of just upskilling our unskilled labor. And we are currently in that space at the moment in the industry.
I am particularly passionate about upskilling and women's education. So everything you're saying is, personally and very selfishly, I'm enjoying what you're saying. So I appreciate it. Thank you. And for sharing that. But Andile, I wanted to know, on a more personal level, what are some of the biggest issues keeping you up at night? And what are some of the solutions that you're toying with? Whether they're realistic or not, what are you dreaming about?
At this point, currently, I think personally, on a very personal level, I think that there is being in primary production and being in the primary sector of agriculture. I have spent a lot of my time dealing a lot with bulk production from business to business, and as much as there is growth in that, but I think that I really miss the idea, the concept of being able to also just deal with customers and clients in general. So, there's an element of wanting to be quite involved in every step of the value chain. So not just on the farming front, and obviously even on the farming front, I do look at growing the operation to a more sustainable, more efficient, turnkey type of operation that is highly technological, so that production can happen in a cooler manner and a better way. But also there's the element of logistics. Just also being able to be quite efficient in the way in which we're able to move our produce to our retailers. But not only stop there, but also I honestly just look at it from a bigger perspective and say, well, if I had a pack house, having a pack house and having a certified product that is exportable, that I think is just the dream when it comes to the industry, moving from farm to pack house, using your own transport to a point where produce is exportable. But not only that, dealing with customers in the sense that I would also love to see a point where we're able to say that we are moving produce off of a farm directly to our own store and selling it off the floor of our own retail store. So maybe franchising one day of a retail store would also be a very big part of what I do. It's part of my passion work.
Thank you for sharing that, and I can't wait to watch you slowly buy up the whole value chain, and have control of it start to finish. I love the idea of you wanting to be more involved with the end consumer. I guess having that barrier of having someone else transport your goods and sell it in their own shop really limits your, I guess, satisfaction in seeing the consumer enjoy the product. But I wanted to ask, who have you met recently or during your career? Who have you worked with that has particularly interesting ideas in your industry? Would you mind giving me a few names, maybe organizations of, maybe someone who's inspired you?
Well, I think generally I've gotten quite a lot of inspiration from various types of people and brands. It's just that there's so many of them that I can't even think of a particular name. But for example, when I look at my career, I've had such amazing working partnerships with various brands. For example, simply from the clothes that I wear, I remember making the conscious decision that it was becoming quite difficult to decide which clothes I'd prefer to have torn when I'm trying to crawl under a fence or jump over a gate. So I then had to kind of figure out, what am I willing to lose? And I said to myself, okay, here's what's going to happen. I need to start aligning myself to a brand of clothing that's going to be durable, but that's also going to be affordable, that I can wear from Monday to Friday and not feel like I don't look good enough to be able to dash off quickly to the bank or into town to do something, but still feel comfortable enough to work. So I then started to just stock up on clothing from Johnson's Workwear. And having done that, I ended up doing some influencer work for them as well. And they have then gotten to a point where they have, they have promos and they allow me to get free gifts from them of clothing from month to month, that I get from them. So I have that. Then obviously I have Sanlam, which has also been quite encouraging because I haven't looked at my industry as a possible investment type industry that could, it doesn't necessarily have to be money that's in a bank that can be looked at as an investment, but assets, simple assets or liquid assets like cattle, like sheep, chickens, whatever it is, can also be looked at as a form of investing and an investment that grows. So I have that as well. And then I've also done some pretty cool work with it's so hard to think of off the top of my head right now. But yeah, I've done quite a lot with a lot of people. Oh, Jim Green Footwear, for example. Yes, that's Gareth Crouch, who owns the Jim Green footwear factory. Jim Green has been a very big part of our apparel from the time when we were still at the College of Agriculture. We all used to look forward to wearing our favorite leather shoes that last a lifetime, only to find that one day I'm going to meet the owner and also do quite a lot of influencer work for them as well. Very good brand, proudly KZN brand from South Africa, which is now also available in America. So yeah, there are various brands that I've worked with. I've worked with Penna. Penna is a seed company based in Greytown. They have me on a couple of billboards around KZN, simply from having had pictures of theirs that I posted on my social media of the product that I got from the seeds that I planted from them, which were absolutely superb quality. So all of these endorsements have been very interesting, and I've enjoyed working with each and every one of these solid companies that have been around for a very long time.
Andile, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And, it's coming to the end of our interview, but before I ask you the last question, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you going through this. It's always lovely to get someone else's perspective, especially since you're in commercial farming. I thought who better to to speak about it from a profit perspective, because where there are profits, there's the opportunity to invest money back into people and planet. And for those listening, if you would like to follow more of Andile's work, you can find him on Instagram at as_Ngcobo, which is spelled Ngcobo. And Andile, okay, so our last question. Given your expertise, what question would you have liked me to ask you?
Olivia, thank you so much for the opportunity. Honestly, I was very excited when I got the invite from you regarding the Earthcast podcast, because obviously I'm learning about sustainability, and it's becoming a big part of my conscious thinking, even in business, and a very rewarding one, because if not our generation, then who? Honestly, I was actually very satisfied with the majority of the questions. I don't think that you have left anything out of our discussion. I think that perhaps, and obviously, I think I've done a whole lot of interviews in my career up until now. So I'm just trying to think if there's any question that honestly would have sparked my interest. The one I'm glad you didn't ask was, so what do you do? Because I've answered that I think a million times in my career or my lifetime. But the one question I think would be one that speaks more to the youth of South Africa regarding agriculture, and how one is able to get into the industry, especially if they do not have a family background or a history of farming, and also what opportunities and benefits are out there in the industry for them. And simply because I know that quite often, even though this question is not asked, but the simple answer for it is always regarding the fact that sometimes it's important to have a broader view of the agricultural industry, and not necessarily just primary agriculture, just because I'm in primary agriculture. I touched on a term, value chain, and the value chain encompasses so much skill in between, from the beginning of production right to the end, based on what I do. So I always stress the fact that people should start looking at industries in agriculture, such as agricultural economics, agricultural engineering, looking at things like quality check, and being able to understand the aspect of agricultural logistics. All of these encompassed are important skills, and they are also lacking quite a bit within our industry. So people should obviously, just when they go out there to do their research about the industries that they'd like to get involved in, especially regarding the primary sector, especially in agriculture, just be mindful that there are many gaps in the scientific space and the biological space that one could look at as a career choice.
Thank you for joining me today at Earthcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. Let's chat next episode, where I will be asking more creatives and intellectual disruptors about making decisions at the margin. See you next time.